I won't see 30 again unless it has a 1 in front of it. And as a result, I have to say, definitely feeling unwanted, superfluous, and generally surplus to requirements. My government and the health service clearly regard me as a nuisance, though the former is happy to send me income tax demands and to accept my cheques, and the latter is doubtless ever ready to blush daintily if I should be overcome with the desire to enliven my Thursday evenings with a little light clapping or saucepan banging. Though to be honest, even if I'd been inclined to follow this most curious custom, I'd have felt a little foolish, since we have no immediate neighbours and I fear the rabbits in our garden would have been a trifle startled if I'd lost my mind, stood on the doorstep and tapped a wooden spoon on the bottom of a saucepan. Some of the young don't seem too concerned about the way their elders have been treated in recent months. A few indeed have actually cheered as folk in their 70s, 80s, 90s and even more have been ignored, pushed aside and subjected to the biggest mass murder in the so-called civilized world since the Second World War. The elderly are the new Jews, and if you think the word murder is pushing it a bit, just stay tuned to this channel, as they used to say, and I'll explain why it isn't. The young who have ignored what's happened to the elderly shouldn't feel so comfortable or be so sanguine, because what's happened to their grandparents will happen to them, with the sole difference that it will happen sooner, a lot sooner. 60 will soon be the new 70. When I recorded my first YouTube video back in mid-March 2020, I explained why the coronavirus scare was a hoax. The video was called Coronavirus Scare, the Hoax of the Century. I suggested that it was either a hysterical overreaction to a disease no more deadly than a common or garden flu, or a devious ploy to terrify the world in order to create a fearful, obedient population which would accept a scary array of new laws in the belief that by doing so they might just survive a form of the flu which was being promoted as a disease slightly deadlier than the plague. I said back then that I suspected that one of the underlying aims of the politicians who were overselling the coronavirus bug was probably the demonization and marginalization of the elderly. Oh, how they laughed and sneered. I was, of course, widely monstered and lied about on the internet, largely by ignorant and anonymous bullies who wouldn't recognize a fact if it came in a box with the word fact stamped on the side in big black letters. But I fear I was right, and I have no doubt that even as I speak, 1,000 red-faced trolls will be penning their grovelling apologies and begging forgiveness for their arrogance and stupidity. Right from the start of this absurd and entirely unnecessary process of putting people under house arrest, it was the elderly who were the first to be locked up, or locked in if you prefer. For absolutely no good reason, the elderly were told that they had to stay in their own homes to protect themselves, hospitals, and the world. There was never one shred of evidence for this. On the contrary, it was clear from the start that this cruelty was based on political expediency rather than scientific necessity. Men and women over 70 were told that they couldn't see their loved ones, and many were told that they would be refused medical treatment, whatever might be wrong with them. People who died, for whatever reason, died alone, abandoned by a system they'd helped to create and pay for. And it was all total bollocks, of course. The elderly aren't likely to die from the coronavirus just because they're old. The people most likely to die from the coronavirus are the people who are most likely to die from the flu. People who are frail, unfit, overweight, or suffering from serious long-term health problems. As a doctor, I can tell you there seem to be just two big differences between the coronavirus and the ordinary flu virus. First, a bad flu virus can kill more people. Second, no flu virus has ever got this much attention or put an entire civilization back several centuries. The fact is that the risk of dying from the coronavirus is, for most healthy adults, minute. However, There have been many more deaths than there should have been because of government policies. It isn't just the lockdowns and the terror that have killed people unnecessarily, but the way the coronavirus has been mismanaged, either deliberately or through gross incompetence. If the mathematical modelers, the medical and scientific advisors, the so-called experts and the politicians had all gone on holiday last January, at least 100,000 people around the world would still be alive. The whole damn fuss has been unnecessary, and many of the deaths were unnecessary too. I haven't forgotten, by the way, about my charge of murder. I'll come to that soon. But before I do, I just want to say a few more things about the way the elderly have been abused during all this unscientific bullying and blatant discrimination. And it was and is discrimination. Just imagine the fuss there would have been in the posh papers if it had been announced that all homosexuals or women or Methodists were to be put under house arrest. Imagine the fuss if governments had, more sensibly, announced that everyone overweight had to stay indoors to protect the health services. That would at least have had the merit of being logical. The elderly were, in many parts of the world at least, denied all medical care. Many were manipulated into signing "do not resuscitate" forms, effectively signing their own suicide notes. By being locked away for longer than anyone else, their immune systems were weakened. Many, without internet access, had real difficulty in obtaining food supplies because, despite its promises, their government made virtually no effort to ensure that the elderly received food. The elderly were told that they couldn't see their families. The big lie was that this was to protect the hospitals, though no one even tried to explain why this should be. And the nonsense was highlighted by the fact that in some areas the elderly were told that they wouldn't be treated in hospital whatever was wrong with them. None of this was a real surprise, of course. The elderly have been demonized by the media for a long time. They've been blamed for poverty, the weather, and anything else you can think of, despite having worked and paid taxes all their lives. Governments see the elderly as worthless and an expensive drain on society. If you doubt that, just look at the sentences given to thugs who attack the elderly. Mug a 40-year-old and you'll be punished severely. Mug an 80-year-old and you'll get a light slap on the wrist, at worst. And of course the elderly are sneered at and laughed at just for being elderly. When a movie based on my novel Mrs. Caldecott's Cabbage War was released, the reviewer for the London Sunday Times dismissively and patronisingly described what he thought were the movie's it described the movie's target audience, as he thought, as undemanding oldies. I wrote the novel to draw attention to exactly this sort of rampant ageism. And so we're now at the nitty-gritty, the murder charge. Some of you may suspect that I'm exaggerating, a little hyperbole to draw attention to a small problem. You'd be wrong if you thought that. The fact is that throughout the world, countless thousands of elderly patients with the coronavirus were thrown out of hospitals and dumped in care homes. Now, let's pause a moment. What sort of people are you likely to find in care homes? A, fit young folk. B, fit old folk. C, sick old folk. It is not difficult, is it? You don't go into a care home unless you're elderly, frail and in need of some care and attention because you're probably suffering from a range of health problems. And so, hospitals sent patients with the coronavirus into care homes which were full of frail elderly patients with health problems, the very people who often die of the flu. Every winter, no one would ever dream of sending a patient with the flu into a care home. But hospitals sent thousands of coronavirus patients into care homes. The staff in the care homes had no equipment or facilities for isolating the patients who came from the hospital with the the coronavirus, for isolating them from the patients who didn't have it, but who were already ill with respiratory problems, heart problems, or whatever. And guess what happened next? Well, you don't need a medical degree to work it out. Thousands of elderly, frail people in care homes caught the coronavirus, and because no one would or could treat them, they died in droves. Negligence in the care of the elderly in these homes has been widely reported. Stories that would make anyone with a heart weep and feel a deep, undying fury. Look at the figures. In Ireland, Norway, France and Belgium, more than half of all the coronavirus deaths were in care homes. In the UK and Sweden, over a third of coronavirus deaths were in care homes. Wasn't it an amazing coincidence that hospitals all over the world did the same stupid thing? All dumped coronavirus patients in care homes. For governments everywhere, this had the bonus of pushing up the total death rates, so providing some justification for the otherwise unjustifiable lockdowns and the utterly stupid and scientifically indefensible social distancing nonsense. We all know that governments have been doing everything they can to push up the total number of coronavirus deaths by, for example, listing patients as having died of the coronavirus when they actually died with it. Two very different things. At this point, we have to ask a simple question. Were the old people with the coronavirus sent into care homes through stupidity and incompetence, or deliberately to kill off a lot of other old people? The answer to this question will only matter when the hospital staff responsible are taken to court and tried, as I sincerely hope they will be. If they sent sick old people with the coronavirus into care homes through stupidity and incompetence, then they'll probably get away with a manslaughter charge. Even if they erroneously expected their hospitals to be filled with younger coronavirus patients, that's still no excuse. But if they deliberately sent old people with the coronavirus into care homes, knowing that other residents would catch the bug and die, and you'd have to be pretty stupid not to realise that, then the charge will be murder. And we're looking at a mass murder charge of which even the Nazis might be ashamed. The added bonus charge, by the way, is that most of the elderly people who were sent to care homes with the coronavirus had caught the bloody thing in hospital. Because, as everyone knows, or should know, most hospitals are so badly managed these days that they are the one place in the world where you're most likely to catch a deadly bug. In a way, it doesn't really matter whether it was stupidity, incompetence, panic, a lack of care, or homicide. The fact is that umpteen thousand old people died before they should have died. And the hospitals which sent them to their death were largely left half empty because the expected hordes of coronavirus patients never turned up. The patients who died in care homes died alone with no family or spiritual support. The only people around them ludicrously dressed as though for a space flight. The hospitals, hordes of advisors and politicians who allowed it to happen, and who recklessly created the circumstances, are all guilty and shouldn't be allowed to get away with their crimes, whether they be crimes of omission or commission. We live in rich societies, and those responsible for caring didn't care. They dumped the elderly like bags of garbage. The people who were responsible for this Holocaust will probably whinge, wring their hands and say, "Oh, we were just doing what we were told to do." We've heard that excuse before, half a century or so ago, and it didn't work then, and it won't work now. I'll be campaigning for all those responsible to be tried in court. My name is Vernon Coleman. Thank you for watching.